I stood on that auction platform in Arizona Territory, 1868, as my own father counted the gold coins that would buy my freedom from a family that saw me as nothing but shame and expense. The weathered cowboy who purchased me wasn't looking for a wife who could bear children. He was searching for something far more dangerous in a woman like me. But what happens when the man who bought your body discovers he's actually captured your fighting spirit? My bare feet burned against the wooden platform as the Arizona sun beat down on Tucson's dusty Main Street in 1868. The rope around my wrists felt tighter with each breath I took, and I could taste the desert dust that coated my cracked lips. 23 years old, and here I stood like a broken horse nobody wanted to buy. "Step forward, girl," barked the auctioneer, a man with gold teeth and whiskey breath. His voice carried across the small crowd of ranchers and drifters who had gathered to see what poor soul was being sold today. I shuffled closer to the edge of the platform, my worn calico dress catching on the rough wood. The morning had started with my father's cold words echoing in our tiny cabin. "Catherine, you've brought nothing but shame to this family for 3 years now. No husband wants a wife who can't give him sons." Ma had turned away when he said it, her shoulders shaking as she kneaded bread dough with angry fists. The decision was already made. Now strangers pointed at me like I was cattle at market. A heavy-set rancher with tobacco stains on his shirt grabbed my chin, turning my face left and right. "She looks healthy enough," he muttered to his companion, "but what good is damaged goods?" His rough fingers left marks on my jaw that burned worse than the desert wind. "Gentlemen, let's start the bidding at $50, called the auctioneer. My heart sank. $50 was what farmers paid for a broken plow or a lame mule. The crowd murmured among themselves, but nobody raised a hand. Then I heard them, slow, steady footsteps approaching from behind the platform. Spurs jingled with each step, creating a rhythm that somehow cut through all the other noise. The crowd grew quiet, and even the auctioneer paused to look over my shoulder. A shadow fell across the wooden boards beside me. I could smell leather and soap, so different from the unwashed bodies pressing close to the platform. The stranger didn't push forward like the others. He simply stood there, patient as stone. "Do I hear 50? The auctioneer tried again, his voice less confident now. The silence stretched on until it became uncomfortable. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed 10 o'clock, and I realized this might be the last time I heard it as Catherine Wells instead of someone else's property. Just when I thought nobody would bid at all, a deep voice spoke from directly behind me. $200. The words hit the crowd like thunder rolling across the desert. Every head in that dusty street turned toward the voice, including mine. The man standing behind the platform wore a black hat pulled low, but I could see weathered hands resting easy on his belt. Unlike the other men crowding around, he didn't push forward or grab at me. He just waited, calm as a mountain lake. "Sir," the auctioneer stammered, clearly caught off guard. "Did you say 200? Gold teeth flashed in a nervous smile. That's quite generous for a woman with her particular problem." The stranger stepped into view then, and I got my first real look at him. He was tall and lean, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of sage-grass after rain. His clothes were clean but worn from honest work, the kind of man who owned his own land but wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty working it. "I said what I said," he replied, pulling out a leather pouch that clinked with the sound of real gold coins. "Question is, are we going to stand here talking all day, or are we going to finish this business?" My father pushed through the crowd then, his face flushed red with excitement and greed. "Now hold on there, mister. We haven't heard all the offers yet. Maybe someone else wants to bid higher?" He looked around hopefully, but the other men were already backing away, shaking their heads. The stranger counted out gold pieces into his palm, letting them catch the sunlight. "Anyone else want to match 200? His voice was steady, but there was steel underneath it that made even my father take a step back. The auctioneer's hammer came down with a sound like breaking branches. "Sold to the gentleman in the black hat." My legs nearly gave out from under me. But somehow, I stayed standing. As the crowd began to scatter, the stranger approached the platform. Up close, I could see kindness in those sage-colored eyes, mixed with something else I couldn't quite name. "My name's Daniel McKinnon," he said, offering his hand to help me down. "And you don't need to be afraid of me." But I was afraid. Not of him, but of what came next. "Why?" I whispered as my feet touched solid ground. "Why would you pay so much for someone like me?" Daniel looked at me for a long moment, then glanced back at my parents, who were already walking away with his gold clutched in my father's greedy fists. "Maybe because I know what it's like to be worth more than people think," he said quietly. "Come on, let's get you out of this heat." As we walked toward his wagon, I dared to look back once. Ma stood by their old cart, tears streaming down her face as she watched me leave. For just a second, our eyes met across the dusty street, and I saw something there I'd never seen before. Regret so deep it seemed to swallow her whole. But there was no going back now. Whatever Daniel McKinnon had planned for me, it couldn't be worse than the family that had just sold me like a broken tool they no longer needed. The morning Daniel showed me the hidden room beneath his kitchen floor, I knew my new life held secrets darker than Arizona dust. "Catherine, there's something you need to see," he said, lifting a wooden panel that revealed steps leading down into blackness. My heart hammered as I followed him into a space filled with supplies, weapons, and maps covered in red marks. "What is this place?" I whispered, running my fingers along shelves stocked with enough food and ammunition to last months. Daniel lit a lantern, shadows dancing across his weathered face. 3 years ago, Apache raids weren't random attacks. They were planned strikes against specific families. He pointed to the maps, each red X marking a destroyed homestead. "My wife Mary wasn't killed in childbirth, Catherine. She was murdered during a raid while I was away helping neighbors. The baby died with her." The truth hit me like a physical blow. This man hadn't bought me seeking a wife, he'd bought me seeking an ally in his war for survival. The room around us felt suddenly smaller, filled with the weight of his grief and rage. "The territorial government won't send enough soldiers," Daniel continued, his voice steady but his hands shaking. "So those of us left have formed our own network. We share information, coordinate defenses, and sometimes," he paused, meeting my eyes, "sometimes we strike back." Outside, I could hear horses approaching fast. Daniel grabbed a rifle from the wall, motioning for me to stay below. Through the kitchen floorboards above, I listened to voices I didn't recognize, discussing movements in the mountains, speaking of families needing protection and warriors preparing for larger attacks. When the visitors left, Daniel helped me back upstairs. The ordinary kitchen looked different now. Every window a potential firing position. Every door a barrier against death. I understood why he'd needed someone he could trust completely, someone who wouldn't panic or betray his secrets. "The Patterson place is next," Daniel said quietly. "They have 3 young daughters and an old man who can barely hold a rifle. If we don't help them, they'll die, just like Mary did." I thought about Mrs. Patterson, who'd always been kind to me at church gatherings. Her girls were sweet things, who giggled behind their hands and helped serve Sunday dinners. The idea of them facing the same fate as Daniel's family made my stomach turn. "What do you need me to do?" I asked. Daniel studied my face for a long moment. "Can you shoot?" "My father taught me to hunt rabbits when I was 12. Men are bigger targets than rabbits," he said grimly. "But they also fight back harder." That evening, as Daniel taught me to load and fire his spare rifle, I realized my worth to him had nothing to do with cooking or cleaning. He needed a partner who could stand beside him when death came calling. And in this harsh territory, death visited often. The question burning in my mind wasn't whether I could kill to protect innocent people. It was whether I was strong enough to live with what came after. The scream that shattered our dawn sleep 2 weeks later came from the direction of the creek, high and desperate like a wounded animal. I grabbed Daniel's spare rifle while he reached for his boots. both of us moving with the quick efficiency we'd practiced each morning since my education in frontier warfare began. "Stay behind me," Daniel ordered. But when we reached the creek bank, what we found changed everything about our careful plans. A young Apache woman, barely older than me, knelt beside the water with her hands pressed against a bleeding wound in her shoulder. Her dark eyes blazed with pain and fury. But when she saw us, something unexpected happened. She spoke in clear English. "Please," she gasped. "They took my brother. White men with soldier clothes, but not real soldiers. They have him in the old mining camp." Daniel raised his rifle, but I stepped forward, studying the woman's face. No deception lived there, only desperate truth. "Who took him? Men who pretend to be militia but steal Apache children to sell as slaves," she said, wincing as she tried to stand. "My brother is only 14. They will hurt him if someone doesn't help." Daniel's jaw tightened. "It could be a trap, Catherine," but I knew it wasn't. Something in the woman's voice reminded me of my own mother's tears, the day I was sold the sound of someone watching their child disappear into cruelty beyond their control. "What's your name?" I asked, kneeling beside her. "Ayanna. It means eternal flower." Blood seeped between her fingers, but she managed a bitter smile. Though flowers don't usually get shot trying to rescue family. I helped her bind the wound with strips torn from my petticoat while Daniel paced, arguing with himself. The territorial laws were clear. Helping Apache, even injured ones, could be seen as treason. But the human laws written in our hearts demanded something different. "The mining camp's been abandoned for 2 years, Daniel finally said. "If someone's using it as a base for slave trading, that's information the real militia needs." He looked at Ayanna with grudging respect. "But first, we get your brother back. You would help me?" Ayanna's surprise was genuine. "Even though my people and your people are enemies?" "Some things are bigger than war," I said, remembering how Daniel had seen past my supposed worthlessness to find value others missed. Protecting children is one of them. The plan we made sitting beside that creek was dangerous beyond measure. Daniel and I would approach the mining camp from the north, while Ayanna circled south, using her knowledge of the terrain to our advantage. If we could free her brother and expose the illegal slave operation, we might prevent countless other families from suffering the same loss. But as we prepared to leave, Ayanna caught my arm with surprising strength. "White woman," she said urgently. "The men who took my brother, they wear blue coats, but their leader has hair like old gold and a scar across his left cheek. Have you seen such a man?" Daniel went completely still. When he spoke, his voice carried a coldness I'd never heard before. "Catherine, pack extra ammunition. We're not just rescuing one boy today." "You know him?" I asked. "That's the man who killed Mary." The Apache war cry split the morning air like a knife through silk, and I knew our peaceful days were over. Mrs. Patterson shook me awake in the gray dawn light, her weathered face tight with fear. "Catherine, they're here. At least 20 warriors moving through the creek like ghosts." My heart hammered against my ribs, but my hands stayed steady as I reached for the rifle Daniel had taught me to use. The 7 women and 4 children we'd gathered moved without panic. We'd practiced this moment dozens of times, turning Daniel's sturdy ranch house into our fortress. "Anna, Marie, take the upstairs windows," I whispered to the Kowalski twins. Their father's hunting rifles felt heavy in their young hands, but their eyes burned with determination. These girls had already lost one home to raiders. They wouldn't lose another without a fight. Young Timothy Morrison gripped his pistol so tight his knuckles went white. Just 14 years old, but the boy had grown up fast since the Apache took his family's ranch 2 months back. "What if we don't make it through this time, Catherine?" I knelt beside him, remembering my own terror on that auction platform in Tucson. "Then we'll have stood for something that mattered, Timothy. Sometimes that's all anyone gets to do in this world." The first arrow struck our front door with a solid thunk that made everyone jump. Mrs. Patterson had her medical supplies ready, knowing wounds were coming whether we wanted them or not. I checked our water barrels one last time. Daniel had taught me that thirst kills defenders faster than bullets. "They're testing us," I called out, watching shadows move between the cottonwood trees. "They want to see how we fight before they commit to a real attack." For 6 long hours we held them off. Not because we had better weapons or more ammunition, but because we refused to break. Every time they charged, we drove them back with carefully aimed shots and stubborn courage that surprised even me. The Kowalski twins proved themselves deadly accurate, picking off raiders who tried to circle behind the barn. Mrs. Patterson kept everyone's wounds cleaned and bandaged, her calm voice steadying nerves when the shooting got heaviest. Even little Mary Wilson, barely 8 years old, helped by loading rifles and carrying water to the defenders. When the Apache finally pulled back into the hills, we sat in stunned silence among the bullet holes and broken glass. Timothy looked around at all of us, soot-covered, exhausted, but alive, and shook his head in wonder. "We actually did it," he breathed. "We beat them." But I knew this was just the beginning. The Apache would be back, probably with more warriors and better tactics. And Daniel was still out there somewhere, with the militia, fighting his own battles against an enemy that seemed to appear and disappear like smoke. As I reloaded rifles and counted our remaining ammunition, one terrible thought kept circling through my mind. What if Daniel never made it back home? The sound of wagon wheels crunching over gravel made everyone freeze, rifles swinging toward the road before I recognized the familiar voices. My parents had come calling, and from the look on Ma's face, this wasn't a social visit. Pa climbed down from their loaded wagon like a man carrying invisible weights on his shoulders. Ma followed more slowly, and I noticed the gentle curve of her belly beneath her traveling dress. She was with child again at 45. Something nobody expected could happen. "Catherine." Pa's voice cracked on my name, and I'd never heard him sound so uncertain. "We came because, well, we heard about the Indian troubles. Thought you might need family nearby." But Ma pushed past his careful words and wrapped her arms around me, tears flowing like she'd been holding them back for months. "Oh, my sweet girl, what terrible thing have we done? What kind of parents sell their own daughter like livestock at market?" That evening found us sitting on Daniel's front porch, watching the sun paint the mountains purple while my parents confessed their sins. The whole ugly truth came spilling out between Ma's sobs and Pa's stammered explanations. "The baby wasn't supposed to happen," Ma whispered, one hand resting on her swollen belly. "The doctor said I was too old, that carrying a child could kill me. But here we are, and the pregnancy's been nothing but trouble from the start." Pa stared at his boots like they held answers to questions he couldn't ask. "Business went sour after we sold. After you left, creditors started circling like buzzards, and that $500 disappeared faster than morning dew. We told ourselves we were giving you a chance at something better," Ma continued, her voice breaking. "But the truth is, we were cowards. We let fear and shame make our choices, and we traded our daughter's happiness for our own peace of mind." Daniel had been listening quietly, but now he spoke up with gentle firmness. "Catherine built something here that your money never could have bought. She saved lives during the Apache raids, organized the best defense network this valley's ever seen, and created a real community from scattered homesteads." I felt a strange mix of anger and pity looking at my parents. They seemed smaller somehow, worn down by guilt and bad choices. Pa looked at me with something approaching wonder, like he was seeing me for the first time. "The territorial governor's wife was in Tucson last week," he said slowly. "She heard about what you did during the raids, how you kept everyone safe and organized. Said you were exactly the kind of woman Arizona Territory needed. Someone who could build civilization from nothing but grit and determination." Ma reached for my hand, her fingers trembling. "Can you ever forgive us, Catherine? Can you find it in your heart to forgive 2 foolish old people who mistook fear for wisdom?" I looked out at the ranch Daniel and I had defended together, at the community we'd built from scattered neighbors and shared danger. Then I looked back at my parents, broken, ashamed, but finally honest about their mistakes. I forgive you, I said simply. But I won't forget. And I won't let you forget either. Because that's how we make sure this never happens to another daughter in another family. The letter shook in my hands like a dying bird. Governor McCormick himself had written these words, asking Daniel to represent Arizona Territory in Washington. But what made my heart race wasn't the honor. It was the line that said, "Your wife's leadership during the Apache crisis proves she understands what this territory needs." Catherine, Daniel's voice cut through my spinning thoughts. "You're pale as winter snow." I set the letter down carefully, like it might explode. They want us in the capital by Christmas, both of us. My throat felt dry as desert sand. "Daniel, I can't even read fancy words half the time. How am I supposed to talk to senators' wives?" He laughed, actually laughed, and I wanted to throw something at his head. "You organized 12 families to survive Apache raids. You turned frightened women into fighters. You think Washington ladies are scarier than war parties?" Before I could answer, Ma burst through the kitchen door, baby Anna crying in her arms. "Catherine, come quick." Timothy Morrison's horse threw him by the creek. "His leg looks wrong." I grabbed my medicine bag without thinking. Outside, Timothy lay twisted in the mud, his face white with pain. His left leg bent at an angle that made my stomach turn. "Don't move him," I called to the men gathering around. "Mr. Patterson, I need 2 straight boards and rope. Mrs. Morrison, bring blankets and whiskey." As I worked to set Timothy's broken leg, my hands stayed steady, even though my mind raced. This was what I knew how to do. Fix what was broken, lead when others froze, make hard choices when lives hung in the balance. "There," I said, tying the last knot on his splint. 6 weeks in that, and you'll be dancing at Christmas." Timothy managed a weak smile. "Miss Catherine, you're better than any doctor in Tucson." That night, Daniel found me sitting on the porch, staring at the stars. "Still worried about Washington?" I thought about Timothy's trust, about the way Mrs. Patterson had stepped back to let me lead, about how natural it felt to take charge when people needed help. What if I fail? What if I embarrass you? Catherine Wells McKinnon. He used my full name, the one I'd chosen when I became his real wife, not his purchased one. "You've never failed at anything that mattered. Why would you start now?" The next morning brought another surprise. A fancy carriage rolled into our yard, driven by a woman in a burgundy dress that probably cost more than our entire ranch. She climbed down like she owned the world. "Mrs. McKinnon, I'm Victoria Hastings, wife of Territorial Judge Hastings. I've come to make you an offer." She wanted me to speak at women's gatherings across the territory before we left for Washington. "Ladies need to hear from someone who's lived what they're living," she said. "Someone who's proved a woman can be more than what society expects." I looked at Daniel, then back at this elegant woman who saw something in me I was still learning to see in myself. What exactly would I say to them? "Tell them the truth," Victoria replied. "Tell them how you found your worth." "Ladies of Phoenix, I want to tell you about the day I discovered I was worth more than $500. My voice carried across the packed church, stronger than I'd ever heard it. 3 months of speaking to women across Arizona had taught me something powerful. My story mattered to people who'd never met me. In the front row, Daniel smiled with pride that made my heart sing. Behind him sat families from our valley, people who'd traveled 2 days just to hear me speak. Even my parents had come, Pa's face showing a respect I'd never seen there before. "I used to think being barren made me worthless," I continued. "But I learned that worth isn't about what you can make, babies, money, or anything else. It's about what you choose to do when life tests you." After my speech, women surrounded me with questions and stories. A young wife whose husband beat her asked how to find courage. A widow running a farm alone wanted advice about dealing with creditors. An older woman whose children had grown shared her fear of being useless. "You all have something inside you that's stronger than you know," I told them. Sometimes it takes getting sold like cattle to discover it, but it's there. The journey to Washington took 3 weeks by train, a miracle of speed that still amazed me. I pressed my face to the window, watching America rush past, farms, cities, forests, rivers, all of it soon to be part of the nation Arizona would join. Nervous? Daniel asked as we pulled into Washington's Grand Station. Terrified, I admitted, but the good kind of terrified. Our first dinner at the Capitol building tested every lesson I'd learned about confidence. Senators' wives spoke in careful, educated words about topics I barely understood. But when conversation turned to Western settlement, I found my voice. You can't build civilization by importing it, I said, cutting through their polite chatter. You have to grow it from the ground up, with people who know how to survive and help others do the same. The table went quiet. Then Senator Mitchell's wife leaned forward with genuine interest. Tell us more about that, Mrs. McKinnon. 3 hours later, I'd shared stories about organizing defenses, teaching frontier medicine, and building communities from nothing. These elegant ladies hung on every word, asking questions that showed they understood something important was happening in places like Arizona. Catherine, Senator Mitchell said as the evening ended, would you consider speaking to Congress about territorial matters? Your perspective on frontier women's contributions could influence statehood discussions. Walking back to our hotel under Washington's gas streetlights, Daniel took my hand. Remember that auction platform in Tucson? Hard to forget. I squeezed his fingers, thinking of how far we'd both traveled. If someone had told me that day I was buying Arizona's future voice in Congress, I'd have thought them crazy. I stopped walking and turned to face him. You didn't buy me, Daniel. You gave me the chance to buy myself. Above us, stars shone just as bright as they did over our Arizona ranch. Soon we'd return there. But now I knew our valley was just the beginning. There were women everywhere who needed to hear that worth comes from within, that strength grows from surviving hard times, that the very things society calls weaknesses can become your greatest power. The girl who'd stood on that platform believing she was worthless had become a woman ready to help shape a nation. And the best part? This was just the beginning of what we could build together.